You might know that I often have a problem of owning too many cars, and recently I got my fleet of cars down to just 5 from a high of 13. But oops, I accidentally just bought another weird car from the 90s. So today, let's find out what it is. So not too long ago, I made a video patting myself on the back because I went from owning 13 cars down to just 5. So yeah, 5 cars is better than 13 from a mental health standpoint, but it's still way above average. But I kind of fell back into my old habits. Every once in a while, late at night, I found myself staring at that glowing rectangle in front of me, creeping back onto Facebook Marketplace, scrolling through a bunch of weird old cars that I don't need but totally want. I think you can relate, right? So yeah, I think you can probably guess by the tone of this video and probably by the title and the thumbnail that I may have bought something. Oh well. Okay, so let me give you some hints as to what I just purchased. Number 1, it's tiny. No, not Autozam AZ-1 tiny. I don't fit in those, but it's still pretty small by today's behemoth SUV standards. Here's another hint, it's from a dead car brand because I'm very interested in the stories behind those forgotten brands that came and went. One more hint, it's not a Pontiac. It's built in Japan because I'm a big fan of Japanese designed cars from the 80s and 90s, and it's pink. Well, I guess maybe more of a magenta. In any event, my daughter loves it. I mean, not that only girls should love pink cars. I'm a huge fan of pink cars. And if you're a man and you're uncomfortable with a color, perhaps you're actually uncomfortable with some aspect of yourself that you're unwilling to talk about. I even wore my cool pink shoes in honor of this car. And it's slow. It's got a whopping 90 horsepower under that hot pink hood. Any guesses as to what it is? Hit pause and comment below what you think it is. And then at the end of the video, comment again if you think I made the best purchase of my life or one of the dumbest purchases of my life. All right, so here it is, my new to me 1993 Geo Storm. So if you don't remember, back in the late 80s, GM wanted to better compete with the influx of Japanese vehicles that were stealing market share away from the big 3 American companies. GM basically said, if you can't beat them, join them. So they teamed up with Toyota, Suzuki, and Isuzu to import or jointly build cars, badge them as Geos, and sell them at Chevy dealers.
Getting to know you, getting to know all about you. Meet the 1990 Geo.
I've owned 2 Geos in my life, 2 Geo Prism GSIs, and now I can say that I'm the proud owner of this silly little pink car. So the Storm was built by Isuzu in Japan, and I'd say it's probably the cutest offering out of the Geo lineup, and it was kind of marketed as the sportiest.
You don't have to be a race car driver to drive a Storm, but you sure feel like one.
Now I've driven this car and I can definitely say it's not really all that sporty. 90 horsepower wasn't a ton in 1993, but the car has a manual transmission and it only weighs like 2,300 pounds, so that helps a bit. They did make a GSI version of the Storm, which I've been trying to find for ages, and that made more power and offered a bit more actual sportiness.
Introducing the all-new Storm GSI, the 16-valve performance force from Geo.
Getting to know you. There's 140 horses in here. Can you, hello, horses?
So the Storm was essentially a rebadged version of the 2nd gen Isuzu Impulse, but we didn't get some of those cool features that the Impulse had. No Lotus tuned suspension. Isuzus were never strong sellers in the US, so the Storm actually outsold the Impulse by a wide margin. I'll make a more in-depth video with this car in a few weeks, diving into the history of Geo and more details on the Storm. But for now, come join me as we discover together the features and idiosyncrasies of this little magenta toy car. So one of the things that you will immediately notice is that this is a very small car. They did make another sort of wagon back version of the Storm, but this is the liftback version. And as you can see, the rear headroom is severely compromised by the shape of this car. I remember riding around in one of these when I was a kid, and even as a kid, it was tiny and uncomfortable back there. But that didn't matter because when you bought this car, you just wanted this cute, sporty shape, even if it meant your passengers had to suffer a little bit. And check out these headlights. Look how far back they're sunk into this bodywork. I always thought this looked pretty cool, and it's definitely a very GM thing to do. It kind of reminds me of a Pontiac. Earlier versions of the Storm had these like little half pop-up headlights, which were pretty neat, but also a little bit odd. I like the fact that they kind of kept an odd look here, but made it a little bit more practical. And this is definitely kind of giving me Miata MX-5 vibes. It's got a smile right there. This thing is incredibly adorable. And I'm not sure if you've ever noticed, but the Geo logo has a little Chevy badge right there in the middle. Yeah, and when you get close up, you'll notice that the paint isn't perfect, but it's one of the nicest looking magenta Storms I've seen in a while. Previous owner painted the hubcaps white, which I actually think looks pretty cool. It's got a couple little bumps and bruises and a few door dings here. This was an inexpensive car marketed towards younger people, so a lot of the owners probably weren't all that careful with it. Although as far as I can tell, there was a long-time owner that bought this new, and she had it up until this year. So you would expect a few bumps and bruises for a car this old, a car that actually got used as A to B transportation. And then looking at the back of this thing, it's pretty wide. It's got a wide stance. And even these non-GSI Storms kind of got this cool little lip down here, give it a more sporty look. Also has really cool hidden door handles. Oh, and do you remember these things? If you've owned a car from the 80s or 90s, you'll remember these slide-in antennas. This one actually still works. It's not stuck like a lot of them get. Kind of a cool looking cowl too. Never really noticed that before. Yeah, a few more bumps and bruises on this side, but in general, this looks pretty good for a 30-plus-year-old economy car. So not a lot of power going on under here. It's the 12-valve, 1.6-liter four-cylinder engine, and it makes a whopping 90 horsepower. Earlier versions of this motor made 95, but they changed a few things for 93, I think. And it made less horsepower, but it actually made a little bit more torque. So some people say this is actually the better one to have, even though it has slightly less horsepower. Of course, you could get that GSI version, which gave you the 16-valve engine, a lot more sporty. But this isn't too terrible by the standards of 93. So yeah, not a super common engine here in the States, especially now when there's not very many Storms left on the road. So parts availability is a bit spotty. Previous owners said they had a hard time finding this boot right here. So they sealed it up with some tape, and it's doing a pretty good job so far. And when you have an economy car, you buy the cheapest battery possible, Econo Power. But yeah, very, very clean under here. Everything's still in very good condition. The previous owner did a lot of cleanup and fixes before I got it. New radiator, some new belts and hoses, new plugs, wires. Everything is looking pretty clean under here, which I'm happy about. All right, let's take a look at the interior. All right, so here we are inside my 1993 Geo Storm. My friend had one of these when I was younger, and I always thought that it was a pretty nice looking interior. It seemed like it was a little bit higher end than the Toyota Tercel that I had at the time. This actually had power steering and a passenger side mirror and air conditioning. My Tercel didn't have all that. And the materials just looked a little bit nicer too. Though I will say this, if you're familiar with Geo Storms, you know that the dashboards didn't exactly stand the test of time. I don't think I've ever seen a Geo Storm dashboard that didn't have at least one crack in it. This one right here is probably the best out of any that I've ever seen. There's only two little tiny cracks right here. A lot of them are way more cracked, but back in the day, it looked really nice. Got this cool little Geo Storm emblem here on the right side. I really dig this sort of pod that you got going on here. That's also sort of reminiscent of Pontiacs with these switches here on the side for the lights and the windshield wipers. Pretty simple gauges with a little Geo emblem right at the top. And look, there's actually an airbag here, only on the driver's side. I don't think passenger side airbags were required until maybe like 94. Correct me if I'm wrong. Most of my old cars don't have any sort of airbag. Who knows if this still works or it would actually protect me in the case of a crash, but there's one here. A little dainty turn signal stock over here. Pretty cool little mirror adjusters that we've got here. And if you're young, you might not even know what these things are. Yep, that's how you crank up and down the windows. Yeah, I know you know what these are, but there's a few people out there that have no idea what this is. In general, it's in really good shape in here. The seats are in very good condition, aside from a little rip on the driver's side. Back seats look like they've never even been sat in, although I can understand why. There's very little space back there. Though I am kind of surprised for such a small car. I fit in here really well. I'm 6'3", and there's like a lot of headroom in here actually. Got a very Japanese sounding horn. Also, I love this very simple controls for the climate control system, as opposed to all the newfangled screens and other bull that we have nowadays. Delco stereo still works. No cassette player though, no CD player, just a radio. Also a huge fan of this chonky shifter boot we've got right here. It's very industrial looking. Sort of looks like the end of a toilet plunger or something like that, but I dig it. And down here, another thing that you don't see very often anymore, a place to store your change. Because back in the day when gas was like, $1 a gallon, all you needed was a few coins to fill up your tank. Actual manual e-brake. Yeah, it's a very utilitarian vehicle, but if I had bought this in 1993, I would have been pretty happy with it, I think. And kudos to the original owner for keeping it in such good shape. Yeah, it's only got 117,000 miles on it, but a lot of these got trashed by that point. And I really don't want to do it, but I guess I should go in the back seat for science so you can see how tiny it is. All right, let's try it out.
There's no space for my feet in here.
This kind of sucks. I did it. All right, so back seat status report. My left knee is pretty much outside of the vehicle. My right knee would pretty much be jabbing the front passenger in the rib cage. And I think if I could take this glass out, I'd have a lot more space for my head and my neck and my shoulders. This is me sitting up straight in the back of a 1993 Geo Storm. I don't even think a kid could fit back here. Why they put a back seat in this vehicle, I will never understand. Oh my God, get me out of here. Oh my goodness. Can't get out. Ugh, there we go. So you get that really sporty shape with this lift back, but it does compromise nearly everything, including cargo space. But there's a pretty high lift over to get stuff in the back, which was pretty common at the time. But you can fold this seat down and get a bit more space. I bet you'd be able to fit a bike in here if you were really crafty. Oh, this is kind of interesting. The center brake light is actually not attached to the lift back. I didn't know that. So yeah, just maybe take one passenger along with you and not a whole lot of stuff, and the Geo Storm will work out just great. All right, so we're behind the wheel of this impressively fast, super powerful Geo Storm. All right, yeah, it's not that quick, it's not that powerful, but with just 90 horsepower under the hood, it's not nearly as slow as I thought it was going to be. Yeah, we got a couple rattles here and there, but it doesn't sound as bad as I thought it was going to be either. Some small engines from this era sound really harsh or whiny or tinny, and this one doesn't sound that bad. So I'm not really going to be able to tell how well this thing handles. Number one, because I'm just driving around town. And number two, because I'm guessing some of these suspension components are original and maybe a bit worn out. It leans quite a bit in the turns, but who knows, it very well could have been like that from the factory. I know the GSIs do pretty well. I've seen a couple of them on autocross courses back in the day. Ultimately though, I don't really care that this car isn't fast and it's not all that sporty. Somehow I just really like driving this thing. You know, I'm kind of thinking back, and there really was a shift in the late 80s and early 90s where economy cars went from feeling like you were driving a tin can to where you felt like you were driving something a bit more substantial, a bit better put together. And that's kind of what I feel here. If I compare this to my 88 Nova twin cam, that car is definitely a lot more fun to drive than this is, but this vehicle feels like a much more substantial and solid automobile than that does, even though it weighs about the same. And what the heck, man, I'm driving a pink car. You almost never see pink or magenta cars on the road anymore, but they were way more common back in the 90s alongside the turquoises and the teals and the yellows that dotted the streets way back then. Now it's just a sea of gray, silver, white, and black. It's kind of depressing. And it's just fun driving this thing. Not because I really want to be seen in a magenta Geo, but because it's sort of like performing a public service to those that had fond memories of the 90s. Seeing this car immediately takes people back and makes them go, what the hell is that? Or, oh, I remember Geo, or I used to have one, or my mom used to drive one. I remember sitting in the back seat of one, hitting my head on that glass back there. And it's just hard not to smile when you see a car as adorable as this thing on the road next to you. So yeah, for sure, outside of like the Radwood crowd or fans of weird and forgotten cars, it's not a car that many would consider collectible. Most people around me just assume that I'm down on my luck and a bright pink Geo is all that I can afford to drive. Little do they know that I have a mental problem that causes me to buy forgotten cars from the 80s and 90s. So should I have bought this thing? No, but I've already gotten so much joy out of it just driving it in the last couple days that I'd say it was worth it. I'm going to take this to some local car shows, maybe even to the next Radwood car show. You're probably already aware, but I'm a big fan of forgotten, rare, and unloved vehicles that often aren't really worth that much. The Storm was an inexpensive car, often owned by a younger crowd that didn't always keep up with maintenance, and being cheap cars, there really wasn't much incentive to dump a ton of money into to them when they started to get older. These were simply A to B appliances in cheerful paint colors. I'd say most of these have already made their way to the junkyard, and only by sheer luck did a select few of these remain out of the jaws of the crusher. This one had sat for 17 years. The original owner got too old to drive and the car just sat. So I bought it from another self-professed weird car guy that put some time and attention into this thing. Only 117,000 miles so far, and I could see this thing going many, many more. No, I shouldn't buy cars like this, but I do love experiencing all types of vehicles, delving into the history, learning about their quirks, and fixing up and giving love to vehicles that might otherwise be on their way to the junkyard. And yes, this whole process isn't all sparkles and roses. It can be really stressful to own an old car like this. Old cars tend to break. Given my history with automobiles, I should probably expect some bumps in the road, right? Or some potholes, or a giant Isuzu-shaped sinkhole. We shall see. So now the Hello Road fleet consists of my '88 Chevy Nova Twin Cam, my 2005 Scion XB, my '92 Jeep Wrangler YJ, Liam Nissan, my wife's Prius, and now this adorable '93 Geo Storm. Was it a good addition or a terrible mistake? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon. If you'd like to help support the show, please buy a Hello Road t-shirt at helloroad.tv/shop. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're well, and I'll see you soon. Just got a head nod from somebody who thought my Geo was cool. People like this thing.
Today, the 90s begin, and we invite you to get to know Geo.
Getting to know you.
At your Chevrolet